Okay, so the topic for today is the style guide and the styles in general. We'll do a little bit of history, brief comparison with other style guides from other organisations, how the guide is structured and how individual style works. We'll also touch a bit on how they're used in competitions. So before we go into anything interesting like that, let's get on with the beer. The first one for this evening is our British Golden Ale, which I've got the Golden Hen. Some of you may have a different one of the classic styles. So let's give this one a go. And as we pour it, I'll have a quick run through the style guides, concentrating on the important bits. So for aroma, we're expecting moderately low to moderately high, which covers almost everything. You can use a variety of hops, floral, herbal, or earthy English, citrusy American, frequently single hops, little to no malt aroma, no caramel, medium to low fruity aroma with the hops rather than the esters, little to no diacetyl. Appearance, straw or golden in colour, which I think we can agree that is. Good to brilliant clarity, low to moderate white head, low head is acceptable, and carbonation is also low. Flavour, medium to medium high bitterness, hop flavour is moderate to moderately high in any hop variety, those citrus flavours are increasingly common. Medium low to low malt character, generally bready, a little bit of biscuity flavour, caramel flavours are generally absent, little to no diacetyl. Hop bitterness and flavour should be pronounced, moderate low to low esters, medium dry to dry finish, bitterness increased with alcohol level, is always balanced. Okay, so this is a slightly interesting beer because it's a relatively new one. They sort of appeared, Summer Lightning, I think these were the sort of first ones, appeared in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. So this one has only really appeared in the most recent style guide. So if anyone wants to give us any thoughts on the aroma?
Mine's skunked.
Okay, yeah, well, it is a clear bottle. I expect that a lot of these are using the hop extracts for the majority of it, especially the bitterness. I mean, this one's not bad. I mean, it came off a shelf in the dark corner of Tesco or Sainsbury's and went straight to my dark fridge. But the malt is more forward than I'd expect. There are some floral and herbal notes there. Any other thoughts?
I'm getting a bit of sulphur out of this as well, but might be the...
Yeah, because a lot of these were designed as being a sort of transitional beer for lager drinkers, losing the malt and higher bitterness you get in a classic bitter. But sulphur is usually a lager yeast thing.
It's more malty than I was expecting for the colour. I think it's probably the thing that stands out most to me.
Yeah. How's everyone's head standing up? Mine sort of disappeared fairly rapidly. I'm certainly getting some of the caramel you'd expect in more classic British beers. I'll describe that as back with some fairly pale caramel. Getting into the flavour, which I think we've all tried it. There's a bit of breadiness there, and the bitterness is present. It's enough to balance things out. Yeah, it's one of those beers you could drink in a bit of beer garden in the summer when we have a summer. Yeah, so it's supposed to have pronounced hop bitterness and flavour. There's definitely bitterness there. The flavour is present, but not as punchy as it can be in other examples. I mean, it's a shame we didn't manage to get hold of either the Crouch Vale or there's an Oakham, the JHB is one of the other classic examples, and those have a lot more hop flavour if you get a chance to try them.
Interesting, it says on my bottle here, aroma, tropical notes of grapefruit and mango, but I think it's very soft, isn't it?
give them a Cloudwater or something and try and compare.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually supposed to use Galaxy hops. This
what?
Theory.
Yeah. You could just about wording hunt out a teeny bit of maybe mango in there, but it's pretty hiding. Anyway, while we sip at this, then try to see if we can pull out any other words and thoughts about it. Yeah, a little bit of background on the style guide and the BJCP. The history of all of these things, as usual for most organisations, is surprisingly complicated. I'm not going to cover it. You can go and look it up if you're really interested. In summary, the BJCP spun out of the American Homebrew Association in the mid-80s. And there's a lot of details of the evolution of who was responsible for the styles, who's responsible for judge qualifications and all this sort of stuff. There's a little bit of the politics you get in any sort of club level organisation, but it sort of stabilised their responsibilities in the mid-90s, with the BJCP producing a style guide of its own in 1995, with big updates in 2004 and 2015, where when I first was judging, we're judging using the 2004 guidelines. I did the exam with the 2015 one, which had just come out. We're obviously concentrating on the current one. The general trend has been towards the styles being more written by the people who actually live in the country where the beer comes from, be more accurate to what it is. The evolution towards the current structure, load of incremental changes and corrections of some of the mistakes that have been in there in the past. Obviously, if you look at the thing, the style guide, styles are divided into two big sections. You have your large categories and your subcategories or individual styles. The larger categories, the important thing about larger categories to think about is they are entirely arbitrary. Don't try and read anything into the groupings here. They're there just to make it easier to deal with. They're not necessarily the groupings used in competitions, though they sometimes are the starting point for those. Competitions in general will use award categories, which are made up of groups of similar beers to try and make the categories similar sizes and judgeable against each other, rather than the ones that are in here that are just representative for splitting them up into groups that are easier to deal with. So the two words that are effectively synonymous within the beer guidelines, they're a little less so when you look into mead and other things, are style and subcategory. So they really mean the same thing. People will use them interchangeably. Don't worry about that too much. So the other thing that's important is the actual names of the subcategories. Something known as British Golden Ale. You'll never find a beer called a British Golden Ale. You might, but it'd be pretty rare. These names are chosen to not be a trade name and to be descriptive of what the style is, rather than anything specific. Sometimes in the 2004 guidelines, for example, some styles had multiple names, like I think you had Strong British Ale stroke ESB, or Strong Bitter stroke ESB, but that was a bit confusing. You didn't know what to call it, especially as ESB is actually a trade name. So nobody can actually use that in a beer name apart from Fuller's, who own that. Some of them will have the country name in the description. This really just points to origin rather than anything else, not where they're brewed. Now again, once again, British Golden Ale, like we're drinking, actually you'll usually find that one in Britain, but something like the Czech ales, you'll find those often in different countries. The Americans brew a lot of the Czech styles, and the Mexicans brew a lot of the Czech styles, quite interestingly. Some of the names have some historic politics in them, so that you'll occasionally see some brackets and things around there. The one that springs to mind of that is in the historic styles. You have Piwo Grzycki, which is a Polish style that also has a German name, which is Gratza, which reflects the politics of the border between Germany in the mid-20th century. Use either name. I tend to use Gratza because I can pronounce it for that one, even though the Polish people probably don't like me using it. The main thing about the style guide is their guidelines. When we really come down to it, these are not a specification for what you should brew. These are groupings of things we should be judging things under. It doesn't cover every possible style, but there's probably a place for almost every beer. when you get to the specialty and experimental categories, which we're going to cover in a lot more detail later. Now, just to give a bit of comparison, there are a couple of other organisations that do style guides. And one I've got here, which is from the National Guild of Wine and Beer Judges, which is a British organisation that does mostly country fairs and their own national events. These are much narrower. This is the 2000 edition. I think there is a newer version, but these are much narrower than BJCP style guides. That page, let's go into focus. That is the style guide. Just those 2 pages. They're very good at judging British styles, and they're gradually getting into other ones. But they're a very different organisation, and they're a very different set of style guides. At the other end of the spectrum is the Brewers Association, which is the guys who do the competitions for professional American brewers. Their style guide is not that different from the BJCP one, except that it has a lot more styles in. Well, quite a lot more styles in them. Quite a lot of them are split down further. For example, you have some additional ones like non-alcoholic malt beverage, which I don't quite get the point of. And then other ones are divided down further, like there's three Bamberg Rauch beers, like you get the Marzen, there's a Bock, and there's a lighter one, there's a Helles. I divided down, whereas those would just go under general smoke beer in the BJCP guidelines. It's worth knowing they're out there because people will mention them and you'll see beers talking about those guidelines. So next I was going to dive into the actual breakdown of a single style, but before we do that, should we have a go at a slightly different beer? Should we go with the Southwold? So Ordinary Bitter, which to start with is a fairly interesting category, as most brewers will concentrate on their best bitter. So aroma, low to moderate malt aroma, often but not always light caramel quality, bready, biscuity, light toasty, malt complexity is common, mild to moderate fruitiness, hop aroma coming from moderate to none, typically with floral, earthy, resiny and or fruity, generally no diacetyl, very low levels allowed. Now I've cheated on this beer and I've got 2 bottles of it, but shall we start with aroma and see what people think, and then I'll read out the rest as we go.
Yeah, it's sort of like quite sweet and berries, I would say, would be the word that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a checkbox on this, and we'll talk more about these doing these in a bit. I mean, I've gone for medium to high malt, medium hops, low to medium esters, no phenols, no alcohol, medium sweetness, no acidity, grainy caramel and bready, the malt description, then with earthy and woody hops, dried fruit and grape, with the description being malt dominated aroma with bread and caramel, medium dark caramel, some dried fruit and earthy notes behind it. So I think we've covered most of those. With all of these, we're trying to get to move towards getting all the descriptors you guys have started coming up with and a level for all of them. So we're trying to describe how much of each there is. So from there, if we move on to the appearance, pale amber to light copper in colour, good brilliant clarity, low moderate white off-white head, may have the low carbonation. Yeah, it's on the darker end of that, but I think that fulfills it. I mean, if anyone's got anything to add there, I've gone for high clarity, medium head retention with medium bubbles, good looking beer. Yeah, so to move on to the flavour, if anyone's got anything to add there.
Definitely getting some a lot of that fruity, the esters coming through. Maybe that's that berry, very sweet, almost cherry-like.
Yeah, cherry is a good call. I can definitely go with that. It's not one I pulled out, but yeah, no, it's a good description.
It's less hoppy and more malty rich than the aroma. I was quite surprised, actually. I wasn't expecting it to be so rich. There is some of that dark fruit flavour to it, which didn't come across in the aroma at all.
Yeah, I think one of the things I pulled out from this is when I was drinking it before was it's actually relatively sweet for the style, balance to the sweet side. So I'm getting more bitterness than I'm drinking it now, typically. So I went, yeah, medium high malt, medium low malt, the hops, medium esters, medium sweetness, low to medium bitterness, nothing else. Yeah, grainy caramel, bready, rich and dark fruit. So yeah, I'm definitely getting that rich and fruity thing there. Earthy, berry and dried fruit, balance the malt. So I was saying malt flavors dominate with caramel and some dark fruit, backed by a bread crust and grainy notes. Bitterness is relatively low. It doesn't quite balance the malt sweetness. I'm getting more bitterness now, typically. So I actually scored this low for a classic example on flavour because I thought it could do with more bitterness. Yeah, so flavour, yeah, we're looking at medium to moderately high bitterness, and I might give this medium at best. Moderately low to medium high fruity esters, moderately low to high, moderate to low hop flavour, particularly earthy, resiny, fruity, and floral. Low to medium maltiness with a dry finish. The malt profile is typically bready, biscuity, or lightly toasty, which I go with. This is more towards the fruity, I think. Low to moderate caramel and toffee are optional. Balanced to slightly bitter, though bitterness should not be completely overpower the malt flavour. Speaking, bitterness should not totally overpower the malt flavour. Esters and hop flavour. Generally, no diacetyl where low levels are allowed. Yeah. Finish off light to medium body. This seems reasonable. This is about what we've got. Low carbonation. The bottle examples maybe moderate. I still call that low. My final comments: we have a good beer that needs more bitterness to balance malt sweetness. So I only scored this up to a 39, which is excellent, which it is. Okay, so just a run through of the style guide, just a summary on what everything's about. So each style will have a number of sections in it. We're just going to run through briefly, just to make sure we understand what they're all about. Obviously, we have an overall impression at the beginning. This is the bit that's usually used outside beer judging. This is what makes the beer unique, what makes it special, what makes it different. This is the bit you'll find quoted all over the shop in beer descriptions and places. It's a simple description in normal language for non-beer judges to read. Next, we have the important bits, which I'm going to skip over quite quickly. Appearance, aroma, flavour and mouthfeel. This is the bit we use for judging. They focus on what you should be able to perceive and what you shouldn't be able to perceive. They're about things you should be able to sense and not sense. They're in very specific language about the various flavours. The quality has got quite good now, so they should all be in things that are terms that are easy to understand. You should be able to judge from these descriptions without ever having tasted an example of the beer. A commercial example of it. It is hard, very hard to do, and quite fun sometimes when you're discovering it quite wrong when you take a commercial example. But they've actually got big enough recently that you can actually do this reasonably well nowadays and be pretty accurate on it. Beyond that, we have a section on comments. This is all of these actually knew the overall impression comments, I think, in the 2015 guidelines. As the comments cover some interesting information about the beer, things you might want to know, general information. There's a section on history. This isn't in-depth research and may well be wrong. It was the standardly understood thing when the style was written. No in-depth research there. If you want in-depth research, go off to Ron Pattinson or the Durden Park Group or people like that who specialise in beer history and will argue with these histories till the cows come home. It's a good starting point, but don't take it as the truth. The section of ingredients. This is not a recipe. The important thing to remember here: this isn't what should be in the beer. This is a list of things that are probably in a beer of this style. Can we take as hints as to you need some more of this, where you think some things may be missing? But it's just a general guidelines of the sort of ingredients you're likely to find in the beer. You have style comparison. which is actually very useful for working out when a beer is miscategorized. When you enter a beer, you're judging a beer, and you know it's not the style. It's worth having a look at the style comparisons to see if you can work out what style it should be in. We'll talk a bit later on about how you deal with beers that are not in the category they should be in, and how you judge them and how you score them. There's a section on entry instructions. Some of the categories, in particular the complicated ones we'll be dealing with later on tonight, require some additional information to be given when you enter them, unlike what fruit you've put in them, things like that. I need to identify the fruit and the base style in that example. Vital statistics, OG, FG, ABV, IBU. Remember, if you deal in SRM, which I can never remember which is, EBC is something brewing chemists, European brewing chemists, SRM is something else. Americans do SRM, we do EBC. EBC is approximately twice SRM, which is a beer colour thing. Once again, don't worry about the numbers too much. And obviously we don't have a full analytical chemistry lab while judging beer. So all of these things are just to give you an idea what the impression should be, guidance of what to expect. And then the final bit is some commercial examples, which are what we're drinking. These are both to help you go and try some beers, see what they're like, compare them to the style guidelines, but also for doing calibration. Quite often for a competition or for a style, if you're doing a big group of them, you might get a commercial example. One of the classic examples doesn't often happen, but we've done it a few times just to get you in the idea of what the style should taste like, and the general impression of what good should be. Right, that's the general outline of a style entry. Shall we try some bass? Some of you may have bottles, some of you may have cans of this. I've got a can. Now, one thing that's interesting about this particular beer is it is entered as a classic example of a strong bitter. But the version we can get usually in the UK is 4.4%, which is outside the ABV range of a strong bitter. There are multiple versions of Bass. Some of you have the bottles and the cans you get in the UK, I believe, are the same beer, but there is a version you get internationally at 5.1%, which my understanding is just a slightly bigger version of the same recipe, or possibly it isn't liquored back or watered down to the same level. The cask one comes out 4.4 from my memory and understanding. But let's have a quick look at this beer to start with. So, starting with aroma, we're looking to moderately high to moderately low hop aroma, typically floral, earthy, resiny, and or fruity. Medium to medium high malt aroma, optionally with low to moderate caramel. Medium low to medium high fruity esters, generally no diacetyl, though very low levels are allowed. And once again, I've cheated and done a sheet already because this comes in the 4-pack, which makes that nice and easy.
I don't see how the aroma could be described as moderately high of anything. I don't think it's a very strong aroma of either hops or malt. I can see everyone else taking lots of big sniffs, and I think they've come across the same thing as me, and you need to do that in order to get anything out of it.
Yeah. I'm getting a reasonable amount of malt out of it. I'd go just into medium high, but only just. Any other thoughts?
There's some sweet caramel, but you could say that about almost every single English style bitter.
yeah. I think this is down a bit on the level it needs to be for a strong bitter in most things. I mean, I've gone with whole grain bread, medium dark caramel, hint of dried fruit, raisin and perhaps a touch of blackberry, earthy and spicy notes in the background. Yeah, so I debate between medium and medium high malts and settle on medium of hops, medium esters, no phenols, no alcohol, medium sweetness, caramel bready, dark fruit toasty, hint of earthy and spicy hops, and nothing much else. I think the main thing here is it just needs more of everything. But then again, it is balanced as the strong bitter should be, really, rather than a best bitter, I think. Now,
Interesting to try that.
Pardon?
Interesting to try that 5.1%, whether that's how it should be.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to get hold of some of that. As with some of the beers we tried earlier, like the million versions of Guinness that are floating around. What we get in the UK is not necessarily the same as you get around the globe, and the same applies for foreign beers we get here. So for the appearance, light amber to deep copper colour, good to brilliant clarity, low to moderate off-white head, low head's acceptable, carbonation is also low. It looks right, which I'd expect from a commercial beer. So, on the flavour, medium to medium high bitterness with supporting malt flavours evident. The malt profile is typically bready, moderate bready, biscuity, nutty or lightly toasty, and optionally has a moderately low to moderate caramel, toffee. Hop flavour moderate to moderate high, typically with a floral, earthy, raspberry and or fruity character. Hop bitterness and flavour should be noticeable, but should not dominate the malt flavours. Moderate low to high fruity esters, optionally amount of alcohol. Medium dry to dry finish, generally no diacetyl, although low levels are allowed. What do people think of the flavour? So,
I'm not sure if it's the esters or the hops bringing the fruity note, but it's a bit more pronounced in the flavour than it was in the aroma.
yeah, that's always a tricky call. What's coming from the malt, what's coming from the hops, and in the end, it doesn't really matter that much. The brewer will know more than you do. I think in these sections you're describing what you can detect, whether it comes from hops or from malts. In some cases, it's quite difficult to tell. Just do your best to describe what's there and how it matches against the styles. So, what I've gone with for this, and if anyone's got any more to add in, is medium to high malt, low to medium hops, medium esters, low to no phenols, medium sweetness, medium high bitterness, no acidity, no harshness. Grainy caramel and bready, earthy, herbal and spicy, fruity, dried fruit and grape. Yeah, I've got the Venus thing there, a little bit of grapiness, which is quite interesting. Even balance, and yeah, seeded bread notes continue in the flavour with some caramel and a hint of toffee, raisins and dried plum in the background, finishes with a lingering fruity bitterness. Let's try and add those descriptor words in, just when you're talking about them. It's just the more adjectives, the better. And then mouthfeel, we're looking at medium light to medium full, body, low to moderate carbonation, bottom versions are higher, stronger versions have a slight alcohol warmth. So yeah, this is medium body. There's strong feelings about that. Then overall, I've been going for a little more malt complexity in the flavour would improve this beer. And look at head retention, because my original one went flat really fast. Yeah, it's interesting. This one is available at this lower ABV than the 5.1, which is outside the category boundary, which is a bit unusual. I've still scored this reasonably well. I'd be happy with I'm giving it a 41, which I'd be happy with. I've got that for a beer. It's a solid beer, but could do with a bit more of everything. Now we're going to dive into the interesting bit, which is the speciality categories. These are the ones that are a bit different. Most of the categories are just as we've just talked through already, but there are the ones that are a bit unusual. We'll start with the ones that are in the main section, and then go on to the ones that are after 28, which are all a bit odd. Start with the obvious one, specialty IPA. Now, this category came into existence because people kept inventing new types of IPA, which got really annoying to keep adding them to the style sheet in errata and all sorts of stuff. So you got your blacks, your Belgians, your rye, your white, and probably 5 or 6 more. You got your northeastern now, which isn't in there yet. We'll talk about that in a second. You need to specify a few things when you're entering here. You need to specify the strength, as in session, standard, or double. These are the American meanings of session, standard, or double, so you're probably about 1 or 2% higher than we'd normally mean by those. So sessions, you're sort of 4 to 6-ish. That is specified in the category. So look those up. You need to specify a style either from the list that's there, which I did paste in, but I have forgotten to do here, which is things like the ryes, the whites, the blacks, the red, all versions of IPA people have been playing with over the past few years. You can subscribe as a combo of those. So I have actually entered a black-white IPA before, just to confuse the hell out of people. Because a white IPA is a wit, and a black IPA you just add some black colour to it, so you can do both fairly easily. You can do that, or you can describe the style if it's something that's not existed in the style guidelines. So that's what you have to do if you're entering as a specialty and northeastern at the moment with the low bitterness and all of that. You have a limited number of characters to do this in, so it takes some good Twitter foo to understand how to do it in a couple of hundred characters, as otherwise people are going to be reading your essays forever. You can give additional details like specific hops that are in there if you don't think there's something the judge would have tried before, or there's something a little bit uncommon like one of the experimental varieties that you're pushing there. What you're trying to do is give the judge enough information to actually judge your beer. From a judging point of view, you're doing the opposite, really. You're reading what they have said about their beer, checking it actually matches IPA. So an IPA should be a moderately bitter, unless you say something about that, beer with hops forward and some malt backing it. But then you're checking they have brewed a beer that matches what the description says. And there's a little bit of leeway here as to whether it was a good idea in the first place. This gets bigger as you get into the more specialty categories. Sometimes you can get some flavour combinations that just don't work, which you've just got to mention. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion going on at the moment about our lovely northeastern IPAs, the ones that look like soup. There's a debate at the moment about whether that is an extension of the existing IPA category to change the bitterness range and the clarity range, or it's just another specialty. It's ongoing at the moment. People will enter them either way. You just need to be aware of it. The next category that's nearly normal is the historical beers. Now, these aren't necessarily beers that are 100% never brewed anymore. They're beers that have either had a big gap in when they've been brewed, or only produced in small amounts currently, or a version of a beer like porter. Say if you wanted to brew an 1820 porter, which is an example I'm going to use later, that would go in historical beer. Once again, similar to IPA, there's a list of defined historical styles, or you can describe a version of an existing style like that 1820 porter, which you're going to have to give some words around to say what it is, or you can just go for a description and a name if you don't think the judge is going to know about it. The existing ones that are in there are Goza, Pivo Grzinski, Lichtenheiner, Brogan Beer and Sarti, Kentucky Common pre-prohibition beers, and the London Brown Ale. The London Brown Ale used to be a main category. It's a sweet British brown ale, but nobody makes it anymore, so it got moved into historical. Those are sort of fun categories to brew if you fancy something a bit unusual. It's always worth reading through them. And then we get to the actual specialty beers, the ones after 28, I think, 28? Yeah, 28. Every one of these categories will have some entry guidelines on it, which you will be provided as a judge about each beer. You'll get the things that were written by the brewer about the beer. These need to not identify who the brewer is, pretty obviously, which can be harder in some cases than others. But they need to give you enough information to actually judge the beer. Usually you should have either something like a base style, sometimes this is a specific style, like this is a strong bitter with gooseberries, so 2011C with gooseberries. Which sounds bonkers, but there we go. But in other cases, it can be more general. With a lot of beers where you've added an extra ingredient like fruit beers, the base style has been flattened out a bit. You've gone for something fairly generic, so that the fruit it comes to the front. So you can describe it as like a porter rather than a brown porter or an American porter. In which case, you probably need to describe a bit of description, or you could just go for a general description. In some cases, you need specific ingredients. You'll be told. In this case, they can be either very specific or quite general. You can enter a, let's say, a Pinot Grigio sour bretti, something or other, or you can enter a wine barrel aged old ale. So you can be either specific about the ingredient or quite general, saying it's just wine that's in there or a particular grape, or very specific about the herb or spice you put in there, or a little bit general, like you can go for a pumpkin spice beer, for example, but that's almost a style of its own. The important thing when you're entering is that judges are looking for what you describe, and the thing from a judging point of view is you are looking for what the person has said is in the beer. You're looking for the flavours they've said are in there, and on top of that, you're looking for an overall balance. It must still be detectably a beer. It can't just taste of, say, lemons, which I've had some beers that just taste of lemons, which might as well just be lemonade. You need to keep an open mind here about unusual flavour combinations. People will put together all sorts of things that you never expect to work. Sometimes they do, often they don't, but just keep your mind open on it. And concentrate on giving some good feedback here. We've had some cases where people have got very bad feedback on specialty beers. In one famous case, they just had the word "Y" written across the score sheet. That judge got told off a bit. He was actually a pro brewer rather than a qualified judge, but there we go. Okay, so just zipping through the categories, we have the American Wilds, which is my pet category, which is basically stuff with bugs in it. So your bretted, your lacto, your tweaked around versions of classic beers. You need to specify what additional bacteria and bugs you put in it, and what the base style is, if it has one. There's a wide range of things that can fit in this category. Your bretted, fruited things, anything with added bugs in it. That's quite a fun category to judge. It often has some terrible beers in it, but often has some really good ones. Fruit beer. Fruit beer is basically fruit beer with fruit in it, pretty obviously. There are a couple of styles in there. There's a basic fruit beer style, which is for a base style, as we've talked about, with some fruit in it. But there are additional styles. There's a fruit and spice beer, some combos, and there's another specialty fruit beer from memory. Yeah, so it covers fruit and additional things. We have spice beer, which used to be called spice, herb, and vegetable. There is spice, herb, and vegetable as one of the subcategories in it. Yeah, what you enter is a vegetable. Read the definition quite carefully. What's a fruit beer? What's a vegetable beer? What's a herb? What's a vegetable? What's a fruit? Doesn't really matter. Just pick the right category. Read the description. Well, especially do the same when you're judging it. This contains spice, herb, and vegetable, plus the autumn beers, which are your Halloween pumpkin beers, and your Christmas beers. If you, this is usually not a great one to judge, because you will get spice bombs. When you're entering this category, you need to be really careful with the level of spice and herb and things you put in your beer when you're judging it. If you could just taste pumpkin spice, that's not a good thing. You need to be able to taste the base beer, and it needs to be a pleasant thing to drink. In these ones, in particular, all these specialty ones, you are judging that it is. There's much more judging whether it is pleasant or not, the combination of beer and herb and spice, than there is in your general categories. Okay, getting the rest: alternative fermentables, alternative grain and sugar beers, so your rye saisons, your black treacle, American brown ales, whatever. Yeah, if you muck around with your sugars and fermentables, that's your category. Smoked beers, anything that's smoked is in a Ralph beer. That's pretty obvious, I think. Or the historical beers, a couple of historical ones that smoked. Wood-aged beer, basically two categories: wood without additional alcohol and wood without additional alcohol. So one is just your barrel aged in your old barrels or your chips without any particular flavour left on them. The other one's where you put some booze in it. So your bourbon barrel aged, your rum barrel aged, those things where you can taste the barrel. In these ones, when you're judging, you're looking at being able to detect the wood in particular, but also in the second category, the additional alcohol. But the additional alcohol shouldn't swamp the beer that's behind it. With all these categories, you still need to be able to pick out the beer, and it needs to balance pleasantly with the additional ingredient. Finally, we have the specialty beers. This is where you put everything else. Your weird, your wonderfuls that aren't just gritted, buggy beers. These are your clone beers. Clone beers are an odd one because I've never entered the beer in this category, and I don't consider I'm likely to. These are where you're cloning a commercial beer. You need to be very careful describing to the judges what the commercial beer tastes like, because they probably haven't tried it. I would argue this category probably shouldn't exist, but it does for the moment. It's really hard one to judge. You have your mixed style beers, where you're doing a combination of multiple styles that doesn't fit anywhere else in the guidelines. If you're doing crikey, what an alt beer lager crash, usually considered a mistake, but there we go. It might work. So anything that's a combo of existing styles would go in here, unless it fits anywhere else. And the final one is the experimental beers, which is really for things that do not fit anywhere else. This is for the really weird and wonderful stuff. You're really judging against what the person has said the beer is supposed to be, and this one is where it is a lot more subjective. You're not judging against anything apart from how good you think the beer is, really. Once again, if you can enter a beer in any other category, do it. At least then you're judging against something rather than somebody's arbitrary taste. That's really there just as a catch-all to deal with the people who make really weird shit. And I can usually even get my beers into the other category, so it needs to be very weird. Right, before we move on, shall we try some Mold Peculiar? So, starting with the aroma. Multi-sweet with fruity esters, offered with a complex blend of dried fruit, vinous, caramelly, molasses, nutty, toffee, light treacle, and or other specialty malt aromas. Some alcohol and oxidative notes are acceptable, akin to those found in sherry or port. Hop aromas are not usually present due to extended aging. I don't think Old Peck is actually aged very long.
I think mostly dark fruits. Predominantly what I get. A little bit of malt in there as well, but it's the fruitiness.
Any more specific thoughts on fruitiness?
Berries and sort of darker fruit, darker berries rather than anything else.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that I said it the other week. Or Christmas pudding with plenty of sherry or something like that in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can go with that. I mean, I'm not giving you a lot of the oxidative notes. You can get a lot more than is present in this at the moment within this style and still be well within the guidelines. I mean, I had a winning beer in this particular style many years ago that was aged well over a year that tasted had a lot of sherry notes in it. But for this one, where have I gone? Medium high malts, low to medium hops, high esters, low phenol alcohol, highest sweetness, medium high sweetness. With the malt going to caramel, rich, dark fruit, a little bit of earthy hop, fruity berry and dried fruit in the esters, and then moderate level of toffee, a bit of blackberry, prunes and raisins at a moderate to high level, some dark sugars and caramel. So yeah, quite closely matching up with the words you've all added in there. So all of those could be considered Christmas pudding ingredients or Christmas cake ingredients. So appearance-wise, we're looking light amber to very dark reddish brown colour. Agent oxidation may darken a bit further, maybe opaque. This not should be clear. I'd expect it's mostly be fairly clear. Moderate to low cream to light tan head, maybe adversely affected by alcohol and age. I mean, I've gone with high clarity, medium head, retention with a creamy head, brown beer with beige head, reddish brown with beige head that fades quite fast. Yeah, the head, this one's retaining a bit better than my first example did. But in some of these, these higher alcohol styles, they are allowed to have a lower head that does fade relatively fast. So the flavour description is medium high malt character with luscious, that's a good descriptor, malt complexity with nutty caramel or molasses-like flavours. One quick note: molasses is there's some complexity over what these dark sugars are available in the Americas when they write the description versus British ones. So they will often use molasses, and treacle can cross over into it. Anyway, light chocolate or roasted malt flavours are optional, should never be prominent. Balance is often malt sweet, maybe well hopped. Skipping that bit. Moderate high fruity esters are common, may take on dried fruit or vinous character. Things may vary from dried to somewhat sweet. Extended aging may contribute various oxidative flavours similar to fine sherry, port or Madeira. Alcohol strength is evident and most overwhelming diets or low to none. Some with age or blend versions may have lactic or Brett. That is rare. This is optional, should not be too strong. Any acidity or tannins may be well integrated and contribute to the flavour profile, which is dominant. Thoughts on flavour?
It's really rich. I take the caramel bready, rich, dark fruit, and a tiny bit of roastiness, I think, as well. Earthy hops, and a fruity esters, dried fruit, a bit of Venus. I thought it tastes a bit like Sam Smith's Yorkshire Stingo.
Okay, yeah.
Without
aged, but yeah.
I don't know. That one's a bit more, slightly more rich and a bit more. I don't know. Maybe I get something a bit more from the barrels, but I was surprised how similar it was actually.
I think it's the epitome of dark fruits you find in so many beers, but this is, this is it. This is the classic thing for dark fruits.
Yeah, I'll have to go with that. I mean, I've gone with medium high fruit, lowish hops, medium high esters, medium high sweetness, medium high bitterness, no alcohol. No harshness. So caramel, rich, dark fruit, earthy, fruity, berry, dried fruit, Venus, balance the malt. Flavour version towards fruit cake, perhaps with perhaps one doused in rum. The high dried fruit character, primarily prune, but with some fig, slight Venus oxidation note at the end, perhaps like a port. From all our classic examples so far, I think this one has been hitting the buttons as close as it can do. So on body, I'm going to go towards the medium to medium high body, fairly low carbonation, medium finish, a little bit of creaminess, no astringency, a little bit of warmth, lowish carbonation, and then overall impression. It's nearly a perfect example of the style. A fraction more complexity in aroma might make it perfect, but I've only dinged it a point overall. So, any more thoughts on that, Bear?
I like how that malty sweetness like really stays there in that initial flavour, and then it's only later on that bitterness comes through once that's disappeared.
Yeah, it does have a quite a long sort of flavour that continues long after you finish swallowing it. Okay, so to finish off, I'm going to cover briefly the other bits of the style guide and a little bit on out of category beers. So the other section of the style guide, there's some interesting stuff in here, none of which you'll really need to know about. There's a section that sorts the categories into various other ways you could sort them. This is not particularly relevant. You usually sort them into whatever groups you want for competition, but it's a section to look at when you're trying to work out what your competition categories are. It will match them up to the 2004 guideline categories, which were a little bit less arbitrary. It would also go to some various historical groupings of things that can be interesting to look at. There are a few local styles that never actually made it into guidelines, that may make it into the next version. There's a couple of Argentinian styles in there, and there's Italian grape beer, which is really interesting stuff. Worth a read, worth a brew if you fancy. And then there's a whole load of stuff on how to use the guidelines, which we sort of talked through in various other sessions. That's the majority of the guidelines. Then what to do when you get a beer that isn't what it says it is. There's a few sort of schools of thought on this. They all sort of end up at the same place. The first thing you need to try and do is identify which category it should have been entered in. This, you can look at the style comparisons, sometimes help, sometimes just a general knowledge of what styles of beer what various styles are, help. This should go in the overall impression, the final section of the thing. You should say this isn't whatever you've entered it as, this should be entered in as an X. Some people will say what they think approximately it would have been scored as an X. So you may have scored 10 points more if you entered in the right category. When you're filling in the various sections, it's good to be clear that where it doesn't match the style it's been entered as. So you say bitterness is too low for this style, for example, similar things. And then in the final section, you say this would have scored much better as a whatever it is. The main thing here is, as usual with this, to stay being polite about it. Don't say you're an idiot, you should have entered this as a whatever, however obvious it is. Sometimes these mess ups happen in the process. It's not, sometimes fairly rarely nowadays, it's not the entrance fault. Something's gone wrong in the system. Their numbers have got mixed up somehow. That's fairly rare. So usually it's good to be able to say this is what it was scored as an X. You can, when you first identify it, you can go to the competition coordinator. It's worth, if it's a radical problem, if it's a black IPA and there's a red IPA, that's probably well, whatever it is, it's worth mentioning it to the competition organizer. We think this beer's in the wrong style. Can you just double check that this was what it was entered as? And they can go back to the system and double check that's what it was actually entered as. If there's a problem there, you can get it moved to the right category or judge it as the right category. Can get a bit fiddly at that point, but usually we can sort something out. But the main thing is to try and get enough information there for the person who's entered the beer to understand why it's not the style they've entered it as, and why they should enter it as something else, and how much better they would do if they did that. Right, that's all I have on the style guide for the moment. Any queries or questions?